Do you ever feel like no matter what you say, you just can't get through to someone else? Especially if that someone else is someone that is very different than you or not very easy to convince. It's frustrating, right? And believe me, I know that feeling all too well because I used to be stuck in conversations because I was only focused on my own perspective. I wasn't curious enough about where the other person was coming from, and it kept me from connecting. And that's when I learned the power of curiosity. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader, a podcast dedicated to discussing women's unique challenges in the tech industry. I'm your host, Limor Bergman Gross, and today I have a pleasure speaking with Julie Pham, and she's the founder of CuriosityBased. With her background as historian and years in the tech world, Julie shares how practicing curiosity, not just as a trait, but as a skill, can transform our approach to challenging conversations, negotiations, and even career growth. Julie says in the episode, curiosity is a practice, and it's essential for building trust and understanding. I think that Julie insights are a game changer, and if you're ready to bring curiosity into your life, tune into this episode. It might just change the way you approach every conversation. So why don't we just dive right in? Hi, Julie. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast, Limor.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And before we dive into our topic today, maybe briefly introduce yourself and your background.
Yes, I was trained as a historian, so I have a PhD in history. Then I worked at my family's Vietnamese newspaper for 3 years. And then I spent the next 9 years in the tech industry before I started my own company, CuriosityBased, in the middle of the pandemic about 3.5 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. A lot of changes.
Yes, lots of changes.
Yeah.
That's lots of pivots.
Yes, sure. So I think that's kind of your background is a living proof that you can actually make changes and not to be afraid of that.
Yeah, that's definitely what I've embraced. We got to adapt.
Absolutely. And we'll dive into curiosity then, right? And let's start talking about curiosity in the workplace. And I know that in our pre-call you emphasized that it's really important to be curious, especially when you have difficult conversations and different conflicts. So can you kind of explain how practicing curiosity can help women navigate those situations?
Yes. So first of all, I just want to emphasize that I describe curiosity as a practice. A lot of people talk about it as a trait, like something we have or we don't have. I think we are all curious, and yet we don't always practice it, and it can be hard to practice. And so it starts with just inward curiosity. And so it starts with just that pause. And especially in difficult conversations when we're feeling all of these emotions, it's just, wait, let me try to understand what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and write that down. And instead of just complaining about it or going in really hot, actually, or suppressing it, actually just writing it down and then talking about it with someone else and brainstorming. I actually just had this conversation with a friend who's a male tech leader for a long time, and he was having a difficult experience on a nonprofit board. And then I kind of just talked him through this, and he said, "Oh, so you're saying lead with curiosity?" And I said, "Yeah, just approach some questions."
Definitely, and I very much relate to that. I think you mentioned curiosity, like we all have it and we need to practice it. I think like when kids are always curious, right? They are trying to do different things, and we always like need to protect them, right, for not harming themselves. But I think I think it's kind of natural for all of us to be curious, and along the way we kind of lose that, and we're so focused about ourselves, about our biases and what we think about our assumptions. Kind of what you're saying, what I'm hearing you saying is that We need to really look inwards and try to put aside whatever it is that we're thinking, whatever biases we have, whatever opinions, maybe feelings, and try to be curious on the other side.
Yeah, and actually what you were saying about kids, a lot of times people think about curiosity as outward, so kids are constantly trying to understand the world around them. What they haven't started to do is to try to understand their own world. Why am I feeling this way? And so there's I think that there's a lot of don't have assumptions. Actually, we can't help having assumptions. How do we practice having curiosity around the assumptions that we have? And that's how we can then and from there we can actually approach the conversation.
So basically, you're saying, okay, we have assumptions. Now we have to potentially challenge them or be curious about our assumptions.
Mhm. Yes. Should I share another example?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so this is actually from when I was trying to transition from working in my family's newspaper to working in tech. And so I had an informational interview with someone who was about 10 years younger than me. And and I was explaining to her all the things I had accomplished at my family's newspaper. And she was at a big tech company. And then she said, "Do you mind if I ask you if you have a degree?" And I was just, "Yes, I have a PhD." And I was so angry, and I held that for so long, and I felt, "How could she look down at me, and she thinks this and this and this," and I eventually did actually work at that tech company. And then years later, someone said, "Why were you so upset?" And then I realized I had an assumption. I was assuming she had an assumption about me, but I also had an
Mhm.
assumption too, and that was, "Wait, that it's bad to why to that she assumed that I hadn't gone to college." And actually, I have a lot of friends who didn't go to college, and so what are my assumptions? There. So we all have them, and sometimes we don't recognize them right away, and for me, when that someone asked me, "Why were you so upset?" I was actually it was I instead of being defensive then, I was actually curious, like, "Huh, I had some too."
Definitely. And how, I mean, it sounds easy, but I know it's not because those things happen in the moment, right? We
Mhm.
react by certain emotions, like, for example, being angry. Sometimes it's being offended, whatever that may be. And we have those assumptions. So, how can we practice that?
Yes, we go from outrage. How do we go from outrage to curious? And
Yeah.
so it's talking it through with people, and instead of just asking for or instead of just asking for validation, I another example, I got this message from a client, a request, and at first I kind of assumed that she wanted something that I was actually pretty offended by. And I was talking about it with a friend. I was like, "I can't believe she asked for this." I think I actually even wrote the client a little snarky note. Like and then I was just, "What do you think I should do?" And then my friend said, "Why don't you just ask her what she meant?" And I was just, "Oh, ask questions. Of course." And then I went back and I asked my client. She actually had her request was quite reasonable once I gave her some space. And so my point here is to pause and then to brainstorm questions, not just to ask for the solution, but also for that validation. Just to, hey, what do you think I should ask?
Yeah. And I think that practicing asking questions and especially asking very open questions rather than biased questions,
Mhm.
right? I mean, if someone asks you, "Do you have a degree?" and then you say, "Well, why are you saying that?" Like, or whatever. Do you think I'm not educated? Like that's kind of a very biased question
Well,
versus, yeah.
what
Go
I
ahead.
didn't realize, I mean, if I look back at it now, it's just maybe she was asking me because there was a special program for people without degrees to get into the company. And 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 I hadn't but I was so fixated on because I
Yeah.
was also, I mean, at the time I was feeling pretty insecure about myself. I was trying to get a job and I felt like, wow, I've got this degree and I'm making so little money and it's the recession. So I also have to think about what was I feeling coming into that as well. And I'm this is not to excuse her, it's just to say there it's complicated. we are all, and there are so many multiple interpretations, and
Yeah,
it's so easy for us to get fixated on our interpretation, and our interpretation can actually change and evolve over time.
definitely. So, how do you use curiosity in the workplace? Especially, you mentioned the importance of building relationships, and how do you do that? I know it's very difficult, especially for women that I coach and people that are maybe more introverted. It's hard for them to build those
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah, and so I don't think that you have to do it in big settings and try to be friends with everyone. Uh, and so actually, when I talk about curiosity as a practice, we've been talking about the self-awareness, that's the first element. The second one is actually that relationship building, and that is trying to get to know other people. So, Limor, I want to learn about you, and then the second one is to share myself, and I'm also going to share myself with you, and that is reciprocity, and that's that relationship building. So that's how I think about that, the practicing curiosity as it applies to relationship building. And so how do we do that in the workplace? I mean, sometimes I'm not a big fan of small talk, but I understand sometimes you need that social lubricant, and then you can move to some questions that get at that can still be work related, but that will help you, that can help get to know one another. And so even asking questions of what influences your one of my favorite questions, I do a lot of work on respect. What influences how you think about respect? Who in your life? What bosses? Sometimes they're negative examples. I had at a tech company very negative examples of respect, and I was just, I'm not going to do that. And so, and to have those conversations one on one or in small group, um, so that is a way of that relationship building, and then also following up. So when people tell you things, to check in, even just that note, hey, how was that concert that you said, that how was your daughter's concert? Or how was your vacation? Just showing that you remember and that you care. And I think that when you have those relationships, then you have also, especially in bigger companies, you have allies. You have people who can advocate for you. People say that your brand is what people are saying about you when you're not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so building those relationships gives people a chance to understand you more than just your work, because sometimes maybe for reasons outside of your work, that you don't perform the way that
Yeah,
you want. But people then know what effort you put in. They know you a bit more. And they'll say, "Oh, well, still Julie, she tried and this and this."
absolutely.
Mm,
And I think that people, when when you remember things like that, hey, how was your vacation? Or how was, you mentioned your daughter was going through some whatever test at school or something even small.
mhm,
People really feel that you care about them.
mhm, mhm. And I think that there's internal and then external. What I've seen at big tech companies is sometimes your whole world is that company and your coworkers. And yet, it's also important to build relationships in the industry and to
Outside of your
go
company.
to those conferences, go even just using, "Oh, I work here," reaching out to people on LinkedIn, "Can I have a conversation with you?" And because you never know, I mean, in the tech industry, people are constantly, there are lots of layoffs. You have to always be having allies and advocates at other places. And so sometimes I've seen, especially at people at big companies, "Oh, well, there'll be room for me here." That's not always the case. I've had great mentors at other companies.
How do you do that though? How do you just reach out to people? First, how do you decide who to reach out to? And then
Mhm.
once you do, how do you do that?
So let's say you hear them speak on a program. It could even just be a virtual program, and just to follow up and say, "I liked what you said about this and this. And I have some specific questions to ask you." So it's not, "Hey, can we get to know each other?"
Okay.
Because imagine you only have 15 minutes with them. I remember once I was introduced to uh, a product manager at a big tech company that I want to work at. And I didn't know how much I had 30 minutes with him. Right. And so we got in and I said, I have these 3 questions. And I'd done my research. The questions were tailored to him. And then later on, he actually recommended me for a role. And then I saw his notes and he mentioned something about, oh, she's very focused and organized. Okay. Coming prepared for that conversation. So don't just, oh, I want to get to know you. Just, hey, I'd really like to know these things and things that they in particular can have knowledge on. And this isn't just about it for mentor roles either, right? This could be for people who are peers with you, people who might actually even be more junior in your career. And that's another thing. People move so quickly. I think don't just look for people who are kind of higher than you, because the people who are junior to you could be one day really big leaders in their companies. And so just look for um, people who you think you read something that they wrote or you heard them somewhere, or maybe you even just saw that they had a really interesting profile, but you're able to say some specific things to them.
Yeah. We have to find something to start the conversation with. I think that makes total sense. It can be challenging though if someone is really not active. Like if someone is not really sharing anything, they're just because there are a lot of good industry leaders that are just not on social media, they're not speaking, they're just doing their work. And
Mhm.
then the conversation starter can be harder, right? I mean, you can ask them about, hey, I'm interested to hear about your work at
Mhm.
such and such company or whatever, but you don't always have a lot of context.
Mhm. And that's actually another way is to even ask people you know for recommendations.
Ah,
Hey, do you think that there's anyone I should be talking to? And so that can get at the people, oh, this person is really smart. I used to work with them. And
perfect.
people tend to feel really flattered when you ask them for advice or you reach out to them and you actually paid attention to, uh, even if you say, oh, this person said this about you, could we chat?
Definitely. And I think people are very open typically to share their wisdom with others. It makes them feel good, right? I mean, it makes them feel, oh, I have something valuable that I can offer someone else.
And the other thing is to follow up with updates. So it's not just that one time. Then later on from that conversation, you might recap and say, oh, I really appreciated how you said this and this. Or even later on, oh, this article made me think about you. Even if it's years later, oh, I saw that you got a new job. Congratulations.
Hmm,
So the
that's
follow
wonderful.
up, I think, is also really important.
But it's so hard to do.
Hmm.
How do you
Yeah.
do that? How do you manage all that? Because like when you meet so many people, let's say you're kind of meeting with a lot of people, how do you keep track of all of that?
I have a spreadsheet.
Tell us your secrets.
I have a spreadsheet. I do. So it's just, and I mean, I have a really good memory as well. But
Mm.
I'll just have a spreadsheet, and actually, I every year I send a personal newsletter update using MailMerge, and my rule of thumb is this. And so I have a aside from the first name field, I also have a personal note field, and I need to be able to say something personal. How was your vacation? How's your daughter? If I cannot, from based on that last interaction, and if I can't, then I shouldn't email that person. And that gets, and I just use the Gmail mail merge. So it's coming from my email. And it's not like this special MailChimp marketing email. And I send things that have personal details, some work details. And you'd be surprised by how many people actually read it. And usually what I do is because I can see who responded. Now I'm giving you all my secrets, Limor. Now it's
Yes.
and I actually have written about this too, so people can I can give you a link that
Yes,
explains how to do this.
definitely.
Is and if people don't respond after a few years, then I just take them off.
Ah,
You
cool.
would be surprised. I've run across people who just, well, you used to email me and I guess I'm not getting that email anymore. And so it's just like, oh,
Oh,
they read the email. Or I'll run into people, oh, I haven't responded. It's amazing how many people read it because I do make it personal.
Yeah, and I think that so first of all, thank you for sharing all the secrets, and definitely if you want to share that article that you wrote, um, I think it happens a lot that we think that if people don't respond, it could be to an email, it could be to maybe something you published on social media, and we feel like, well, I'm just sending something and no one responds. Actually, people read that, and they may not respond, but they do see what you're saying, what you're sharing, and they appreciate that.
Yes, and they also share it with other people. They talk about it too.
Yeah, sure. Perfect. So we talked about kind of relationship building, both inside a company and outside. Let's talk about negotiations and how do you use curiosity in negotiations?
So, in general, I know in the tech industry, we constantly think of ourselves as problem solvers. And so it's
Yeah.
constantly looking for that solution and also a particular kind of outcome. I think when you approach a negotiation, it's be like, well, this is directionally what I want, but I don't need to get exactly that, right? It doesn't have to look exactly like that. What and approaching with curiosity is trying to understand what what is that person's what are the constraints, and asking questions around that so that you can work around the constraints, because constraints actually can make us creative, right? So it's like,
Definitely.
oh, and I understand this so much more now that I'm an employer too. So it's like, hey, so is it you can't give more, the salary can't be this, but maybe there can be a bonus, because for planning purposes, they don't want to give me this base salary because it's just, well, what if this is a bad year? But
Mm-hmm.
we can do some profit sharing. What can I if I do this and it works well, can I get that? Or maybe it's, I actually don't want the cash salary. I want you to make a I want you to invest in uh, my education, or I want to do this program, I want to do that. And then that's I don't have to pay taxes on that, right? So that's actually beneficial for me too. So I'm also thinking about tax efficiency as well. So just uh, as you go in to try to find out what they can do, and also talk to other people about what's possible. I think one of the things that's really hard, especially for women, is we don't actually know how much other people make.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't talk about it, and there's shame around it. And yet it is not illegal. It's not illegal to talk about it. And that's also cultural, because I know in Vietnam, for example, people are just, how much did you pay for that? How much do you make? And it's actually our expectations hold us back. So even if we just kind of even if it feels, oh, to ask exactly how much someone makes, but just kind of, hey, let me ask for some advice. So even doing the prep before you go into the negotiation. I know, like, when people negotiate with me, and they're just like, well, this is what I want. It's just like, all right, well, I know you want to make more money. Here is my envelope, and maybe we can do this and this. And actually that created, for my company, I ended up saying, well, I can't give more than this, but how about we will do profit sharing on this project? Because right now we're not making any money on this product. But if you figure out a way to do that, since we're not making that much money on it, I'm fine with doing deep profit sharing on that. And that also empowers people as well. And I think also, uh, trying to, as someone who, when you're negotiating with people uh, who are asking you for something, trying to have some transparency around what the constraints are, and as someone who's trying to get something, trying to understand what those constraints are.
Definitely. And you mentioned multiple things. So I think being just open minded, right? It's a discussion, it's a problem solving.
Mhm.
And rather than there is only one way to get out of that, right? I mean, you mentioned salary. Okay, the only option is either get
Mhm.
the salary I want or don't. So
Mhm.
actually, there are more options than that. Maybe I can negotiate, I don't know, bonuses.
Mhm.
Maybe I can negotiate equity. Maybe I can negotiate vacation days. I
Yeah,
don't know. I
more
mean,
flexibility in the schedule,
flexibility. Yeah.
right? I mean, there are lots of things that you can do. And and the other thing is, I think no matter what, it's a it's helpful to articulate what you want. And so, for example, I uh, I was negotiating for a new role. And so a friend of mine said, "You should ask. This is a director role. You should ask for a VP role." I'm like, "All right." So I put together a job proposal, and I outlined this, and then I gave it to my hiring manager, and she said, "Okay, well, you're not going to get this." I was like, "All right." And then a month later, she left, and then the CEO calls me in, and he's like, "So that proposal you wrote, that's what you're going to get to do." I didn't get it right away, but I got it within 3 months. And my point is sometimes if I had just like, "Oh, well, I didn't get it now," right? But even the process of me writing it out and sharing that indicated, I want this. Maybe not now, but I want this. Because sometimes I think we think, or sometimes we say, if it doesn't happen now, then I failed. And so I actually also have an article on this on how do you write a job proposal for what you want. Uh, that was actually in the Ascend section of HBR, and so I can share that too. And it forces people to write down, this is what I want.
So already you owe me 2 articles. Perfect. Yeah, and I really think that what you mentioned about written, like writing down
Mhm.
things is very powerful, and it shows leadership. And I just had a call today with a client, and she wants to be promoted to the next role, and I told her, well, focus about your vision. And she kind of said, well, I don't know if I have one. And long story short, kind of we discussed, obviously she had one.
Mhm.
It just was in her head. And I said, write it down on paper.
Mhm.
Actually write it down and share it with your manager. I think just that, even that's kind of, a vision that maybe will not be implemented fully, or maybe not now. It shows how great you are as a leader and that you're thinking about things.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, when I started doing the job proposal, because it was actually another tech leader this was when I was really struggling and trying to find the next role. And he said, "Julie, you're smart, but there are many people who are very smart. So how are you going to add value?" And so that's when I got the idea of starting to write a job proposal, which I did for 3 different tech organizations. So, and also the thing is, once you write it down, you're making the commitment to yourself. Oh, that's what I want. And even like for me now with my negotiations with clients, because I'm actually pretty transparent about pricing. And it's just like, hey, this is our pricing list. If you are interested, let's continue the conversation. But I've written it down. And so, and that's also, that says to me, this is what my bottom is. Like I need at least, this is my minimum. And so I'm not going to back from that because I've written it down. And they know, and from there we can have a conversation. And I know some people try to negotiate when they're just, I want to guess how much I can get, right? And so for me, I'm just, well, know what you need versus, well, I'm only going to be happy if I know I'm higher compared to this or this. No, at least like at your core, like this is what I need.
Yes, I am. I'm very much a believer of being true to yourself and be a leader rather than a follower. And I'll give an example. Like my son yesterday, he just started high school, the last year of high school, and they had a strike here. Never mind. But long story short, few of his friends wanted to go to a party last night.
Mhm.
And I said, doesn't make any sense. You're just starting school the next day. Why partying the night before? I mean, you had all the summer to party as much as you want. I said, no, but everyone is going and all that. And I said, okay, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll let you make the decision yourself. And then surprisingly, after a few hours, he said, well, I don't feel like going. And I'll tell him, you know what? You make your own call and your own choices, regardless of what other people are thinking or doing. And that's what I try to encourage my kids to do. Make your own decisions. And And I think it goes back to what you mentioned about pricing. Like, if you want to price yourself, just make the price that you think is right for you, the value you bring, rather than, oh, because so and so is pricing that much, I should price at least the same amount. I believe that I should price based on what I think I can offer and what I think is reasonable. So I can feel good about providing high quality services and charging accordingly, rather than overcharging or undercharging based on what other people are doing.
Yes.
Okay, and let's kind of shift. We talked about negotiations a little bit, and let's shift about leadership. And how are you leading with curiosity?
So whenever we start something, and I think it's important to ask, hey, what are our goals? What do we want to try to achieve here? And it's also important to ask, and what will we learn no matter what? What do we want to learn no matter what? And that way we enter it as success doesn't just look like hitting those goals. It also looks like we are going to learn, because there are lots of times when things outside of our control make it so that we don't achieve our goals. Or maybe our goals were unrealistic, right? And that's the thing that we learned, that it was an unrealistic goal. And so that, I think that's one of the big things that that going in, it's just, hey, this is just about as much about the process as it is about the outcome. Um, and and then even in having those difficult, remember once I had this, I was basically getting pushed out of an org. They brought in someone who was, "Oh, here's this guy. He's gonna be our new head of this." And I asked, "Am I about to lose my job? Am I about to lose my job?" And like, "No, no, no, no." And it was actually, I had these 2 badass women, both high level leaders in tech outside the organization. Remember I said, get mentors and allies outside the organization, who advised me to ask some questions. And um and so I went in not knowing, the only outcome I wanted was to know more. It wasn't to, because I was pretty sure I'm not going to be able to, this is like, I see the writing on the wall. I'm not going to be able to keep my job, right? That's not the, I could see it. And I went in and I basically wanted to learn how much time I had. Realistically, what was the most I was going to get? And at first they were just, "Oh, no, optimistic, optimistic." And that particular executive, he'd always say, "Well, hope is not a strategy." And so I just said, "Hey, well, you always say hope is not a strategy. So what's the worst case scenario? I just need to know." And I remember I was in the room, I put my hand on the table, so he knew I wasn't gonna leave. I just kept repeating 3 things over and over and over until he told me. And I left feeling so empowered, because what I got was knowledge. It wasn't, "Oh, Julie, don't worry, you're gonna get to keep your job." It's just like, "Okay, I know worst case scenario, I have this many months." And I ended up staying more months, but at least that next day, Limor, I went into that office. It's like, I know. I know.
Definitely. And I think that just knowing a lot of times just is a relief.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
if you know that you're not going to stay there, at least you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. And also in that, I remember when that happened, I was just, I think that the people who I normally talk to are not going to be able to give me useful advice. And so I reached out to these 2 women who were good acquaintances, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, how do you reach out, right? But this was a very specific ask. "I'm going through this. Can you help me?" And I was amazed how they got on the phone. One of them was about to go raise money the next day, and she's like, "Let's talk tonight." And another
Wow.
person role played with me, and that was years ago, and we are still close to this day. And it's because I actually also, I asked for help with something very specific, and I kept them updated as well.
That's wonderful. Can't believe time passes so quickly, and I know we haven't talked about everything. But before we part ways, Julie, is there anything else you want to share you feel like is really important?
Oh gosh. I think for your audience is that just to practice, think of curiosity as a practice, and to admit when we don't want to practice it, because that actually shows humility too. So, and model that for your for the people that you work with, because when you're able to do that, then that opens it up for them to be able to do that.
That's wonderful advice. And Julie, how can people find you?
So I'm really active on LinkedIn. I would love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just Julie Pham PhD. Or I also have a company page, CuriosityBased, and you can. I'm also pretty active on YouTube, and I have CuriosityBased.com, and I also have a book called Forms of Respect, 7 Forms of Respect, and it has its own website as well.
Perfect. I'll share all of those with our audience. Thank you so much, Julie, for being here today and sharing so much wisdom.
Thank you so much for this great. I really enjoyed our conversation, Limor.
Likewise. Thank you so much for listening to my episode with Julie, and thank you so much for tuning in. Before we wrap up this episode, I wanted to give you a preview of next week's episode. And I'm speaking with Daniela Sarmiento. She is a personal brand consultant and a former executive search expert. Daniela and I dive into incredible strategies for women in tech, especially those who feel they are not being seen. And we talk about building executive presence. We talk about positioning yourselves for career advancement. And Daniela tips are really important, especially for introverts or anyone who want to elevate their career without feeling the need to be the loudest in the room. So if this is something that you resonate with, or someone you know you think it's going to be helpful for, make sure you follow, subscribe to the podcast, leave a review if you liked the episode, and share it with anyone you think could benefit from it. And I can't wait to share this insightful conversation with you next week. So I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful day.